Get out.
All right, Matt Wyatt played quarterback at MSU. He is the color analyst for the radio broadcast. Also, host of the Matt Wyatt Show, noon to 3 on 105.9 The Zone. He joins us on the Miller Lite guest line. And, man, it's been all downhill for the Hell State offense since the LSU game. And so the big topic, and I would have to believe on Matt's show too, is, one, can this offense work as people rush 3 and get pressure and drop 8, or most of the time, the last few weeks? And then 2, I think this is where we want to start with Matt. And, Matt, welcome in. But is there a permanent defect that doesn't I'm not convinced of this, but you see more than I do. Is there a permanent defect when it comes to this air raid offense that doesn't allow it to work in the SEC?
No, I'm not convinced of that yet, not to that level. And I know that, like, Bo liked to hash out if you were doing an experiment and you were going to do this real big sample size, right? Like what state fans don't want is to have a 3-year experiment and then find out, oh, well, we were wrong, it won't work. And I understand I understand that. That'd probably be worst case scenario. But no, I mean, what I see is, it sounds like coach speak. Coaches give you these answers all the time, and we get tired of it because we think it's coach speak, but it really is true. Like 90% of this is not what you're doing, it's how you're doing it, or whether or not you're doing it like the way you're supposed to, and to what you touched on, whether or not you're capable of doing what you're asked to do. And I think that's where the disconnect is right now. It's not that, fundamentally, by design, by scheme, on paper, this thing won't work against certain teams, or that's just not it. It's can you execute it with the personnel you have? Then, if you get to the point where you've got personnel who can execute it, all right, then do they do it? Are they doing it? Does that require experience? Does it require more reps? So that's where the gap is right now. It's not the scheme won't work. It ain't going to work in the SEC. The air raid won't work. That's just, frankly, least common denominator thinking. The fact is, it worked in the SEC. Okay, they didn't win a championship at Kentucky in the 90s with the air raid offense, but, boy, they went up and down the field and won a Heisman, had a number 1 draft pick.
You witnessed it.
Yeah, saw it up close and personal. The scheme will work. It's just a matter of, do you make it work? And right now, what I think you and I and everybody are trying to figure out is, okay, is it you have linemen or certain players who aren't capable of doing this, or they just aren't ready to do it yet? Which is it?
Matt Wyatt on the Out of Bounds show talking MSU's offense. There's also a discussion that I get into that an offense can't work without a tight end in the SEC. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Again, I just don't agree with that. I mean, there are plenty of scoring plays. There are plenty of games won in this league and have been for 15 years where offenses never put a tight end out there with his hand down. So I just –
like Hugh Freeze. I mean, Evan Ingram was always kicked out in a flex role, right?
Right. And oh, by the way, he never put his hand down in college. He never blocked any rushing defensive edge players in college. And he went and got himself drafted in the first round. And, okay, so, I mean, I don't think that's true either. But what I'm looking at is, look, this sounds like I'm trying to oversimplify, but it really is true. Every one of these coaching staffs, all 14 teams, and if I'm being, realistic, we got 13 football playing schools in this conference, right?
Sure.
All right, let's do those 13. All 13 of those schools paying these coaches millions of dollars on offense and defense, because every last one of them is at the top of the game in some shape, form, or fashion, whether it be experience or resume or ability, all of it combined. Every last one of them can sit down and draw up a scheme that will work if it is executed. There's only so many ways to line up 11 on 11 and get people open and defend people. They're all good at it. They've all forgotten more X's and O's than most of us will ever know. That's just not the game. The game is then applying that with players that are capable of making it work at this level. I mean, is Nick Saban and his staff, even though they've had as much turnover as anybody, especially on offense, are they doing something from an X's and O's standpoint, a scheme standpoint, that the rest of the world can't figure out? No. They have coaching clinics and explain it to you every offseason. If you want to pay the money and go look, they'll give you the call sheets. The reason they don't worry about doing that is because they know they've got better players than everybody. And they're going to outwork everybody, and they're going to out-execute everybody. If the X's and O's were a big secret, there would be no such thing as a coaching clinic. Nobody would ever share any information. They just know that's not where the game is won and lost.
You're listening to the Out of Bounds Show. We're talking Hail State football with Matt Wyatt. His show, noon to 3 on 105.9 The Zone. Matt joins us on the Miller Lite guest line. So I hear this too. MSU only has 2 running plays, so the offense will never work in the SEC.
Yeah. There's got to be I think going forward, I think long term, the plan and the goal is probably going to be to expand what you're doing in the run game, what you're calling. I would say to that when the limited amount of time that they have had with this complete turnover on the staff and a new offensive system, no spring and no summer, they have spent a majority of their time in practice working on the pass game. Okay, right? I mean, rightfully so. That wouldn't surprise anybody. The practice time they have had, they have spent the majority of their time working on the pass game. And if anybody's shocked by that, I mean, where have they been? What cave were they living in for 2 or 3 months, or for 2 or 3 decades, when Mike Leach was kind of showing you what he's all about? So, yeah, I mean, I think normal offseason, normal preparation, you get more experience with players. Plus, you're playing 2 freshman running backs because there's an issue with your starter, apparently. So naturally,
who's your best skill player, right? I mean,
well, right. He's your best person on your entire team when you get the ball in his hands, right? And so all of those factors, you're limited in what you can call, what you can do. You haven't worked on it. You haven't repped it in practice. You repped your passing game. You got 2 freshman running backs. So, yeah, I mean, they're going to expand the running game as they are able to work on it. But, frankly, there's only so many hours in a day.
Mm-hmm. With the offensive line, is it that they're more road graders and they're just not set up to do this? Or like you mentioned a few minutes ago, you need to give some of these guys time, like Charles Cross and some others, to figure this thing out? Or is it the splits? What do you see on film, Matt?
People who played offensive line are saying that those splits are a huge issue. I didn't play, on the offensive line. Don't know what it feels like. I understand it, cerebrally, but I don't understand it physically because I never had to do it. People who play on the offensive line tell you those splits are a problem, unless you're like an elite pass blocker, especially out on the edge. So that's something to consider. That tells me that if you're going to continue to do it, you solve it in 2 ways. And one is reps and experience, and the other is recruiting. Okay. So if you go to that, I was talking with Neil Price. It was either during a break or it might have been after the game, but it was just kind of one of those think out loud observations, Bo. But I said, one thing about it, if you think about it, everybody on that offensive line, they practiced here since they started practice in September with the full speed reps of trying to block people in this kick slide protection when you're soloed with no help. They practiced it, but really this is the first time in their careers they've ever done it. None of those guys did that kind of stuff in high school. They didn't play at high schools who threw it. None of them did. In fact, there are very few high schools who pass block like that.
Sure.
So, you go find somebody who's done it. Well, those are few and far between, frankly, at the high school level, certainly in the South. So they've never done it. They didn't do it in high school. They've never done it in their college careers. Now they're being asked to do it. And it hadn't gone too well the last few weeks, so against A&M, you switched it all up. You took Greg Island, who's been playing at guard since the change and since practice started. You put him back out there at tackle. And there were a couple of times in a game where they went right by and they lined up in that wide 9 defensive look, the Philadelphia Eagles wide 9 defensive look where the guy, you're already split out there really wide as a tackle because of these wide splits. And you look and that defensive end lined up 5 yards from me, literally 5 yards from me to the outside. And he's going on this angle. I got to meet him on the angle. Well, if you haven't done that against SEC players, you can practice against it all you want, but games are different than practice. The game speed is different than practice speed. So I think it's a combination of inexperience. It's a combination of a lack of familiarity with what they're doing. They haven't done it in games. They weren't recruited to do it. Doing it for the first time, lining up against Arkansas and Texas A&M and those guys in Kentucky who are capable SEC players, and you're learning a hard lesson. And I think here's the thing, Bo, and that's a long answer, but here's the thing that was maybe the most concerning for me is, and to Mike Leach's credit, he never pulls any punches. Okay, he's being totally honest when he says, well, we're seeing one thing in practice, but then it's not translating over to the field in the game. That scares me a lot as a player, and it would if I was a coach, to all of a sudden think, man, our self-evaluation is off. That's big. And my example is this, Bo.
Croom.
Exactly. Okay, Bo, and look, think about this, Bo. You drive a really nice vehicle. I've seen it. You drive a really nice car. And if that thing is not working, you take it to a mechanic. What is the most important step in the whole process of fixing your vehicle? It is the diagnosis.
Right.
If you take it to a guy, he can have the best track record in the world, but if he misdiagnoses what's wrong with the thing to begin with, $2,000, $3,000 later, it's still not working because you got the first step wrong.
Right.
You misdiagnosed. So translate that to football. If we're coming out of practice and we've actually misdiagnosed where we are, we haven't actually been realistic with ourselves yet, and we're finding it out in a game. Now you, as a coaching staff, you start asking tough questions in your coaching meetings and having to retool stuff. And that's not fun during the middle of the season.
No, or realistic in year one. And now when they're playing a true freshman, which we'll get to in just a second. Matt Wyatt on the Out of Bounds Show, MSU color analyst, the Matt Wyatt Show, noon to 3 on 105.9 The Zone. Matt, I don't know if you watched it a couple of weeks ago, but Joel Klatt did a hit on the air raid, and he's been able to watch it, up close because he's out there with Fox Sports and the Pac-12 and everything. He talked about dropping, that when they drop 8, you have to have a quarterback that can throw it outside of the numbers accurately. Yeah. Will Rogers on Saturday dropped that ball to Malik Heath. Evidently, you have to do that, and Gardner mentioned it too, Minshew, quite a few times. Is that what you see, Matt, that you've got to have a guy that can spin it out there at least X amount of times a game so that they have to adjust for that, and then you can go back to the crossing routes, and they're maybe even more open?
Yes. So if you go back and you watch the touchdown play to Malik Heath, there in zone coverage, you'll see the underneath defender, who's the flat defender. You've heard that term a lot, right? There's that white jersey of it's either a linebacker or nickel personnel who is actually between Will Rogers and the receiver, Malik Heath, on the sideline, right? Like you'll see him out there in no man's land between the two offensive players. And a lot of quarterbacks see that guy and they think, he's in my throwing lane, I can't throw it to that guy. But then when you see it on film, the coaches are telling you, no, trust me, look, he's 5 steps inside and he's shallow. If the ball has the right arc on it, with velocity still, you're going to get it over his reach and complete that ball to the sideline. And as the game goes on, if you complete those, that player gets wider and wider and wider, trying to cheat and get an easy pick.
Okay.
And now things spread out and are open. Okay, so Will's done it in high school. He's played in the system. He throws it out there, and he's a true freshman with the arm strength to do it. Not many true freshmen have the arm strength to do it. So he's right. They're all right. That throw has to be completed. I watched the film against Arkansas and Kentucky, and there were times when that ball was there, but KJ didn't do it. He didn't want to throw it because, he's hesitating. And there were a couple of times, too, where, there was a lack of velocity on the ball that KJ threw, and he got it batted away against Kentucky. So that was a good sign. It's a good thing to put that on film because in 2 weeks you line up and play somebody, they're going to have seen it and go, hey, look, you got to cover that because this freshman can make that throw. This is what I would tell you. You touched on Gardner. Just remember this, and you can go back and watch it yourself. It's all over YouTube. 2 years ago when he was Mike's quarterback at Washington State, they played some teams that wanted to try that. They wanted to try let's rush 3, let's drop 8. They played, Oregon is a good example when Gardner played against them. I think another one was
Washington.
UCLA. Washington's a good example. Washington had much better players.
Sure.
Especially on the line of scrimmage. But especially watch the Oregon one. There were several teams who tried to do that to them, and they found out in the game, number one, rushing 3, we can't get to the quarterback. Washington State's offensive line blocked those 3 rushers consistently. We can't pressure him. And when you couldn't pressure Gardner Minshew, you could drop 11. And if you didn't pressure him, he was going to complete the football. They found out if we do this, we can't pressure him, and we can't get him off the field. He'll complete 35, 40 throws underneath and beat us to sleep with it. We have to get people involved in the line of scrimmage and go get the quarterback. Otherwise, we can't get off the field. He was dialed in enough with a group of players around him that have been in that system for 8 years, 4, given their careers, that they were able to just pick people apart unless you force them into mistakes. State, to this point, has not forced any of these defenses to get out of it. These defenses have said, we'll drop, and we're going to bet that you can't run 10 to 12 plays in a row against this without making a mistake.
Right.
That we'll take that bet. And so far, the bet's paid off. They have to make them pay for it, or else teams will just continue to do it.
He is Matt Wyatt on the Miller Lite guest line. You're listening to ESPN 105.9 The Zone. So, Matt, I think it'll get worse before it gets better because now it looks like they're going to throw a true freshman into the fire. You still have Bama and Georgia to play, and some other teams that still have some players. So do you think – I know you don't know for sure, but what is your take on if they ride with Will Rogers just to rep him out the rest of the year and get ready for next Labor Day?
The only thing you have to be careful of, I think, is as a staff, Bo, to make sure if you see any signs from Will during this run of playing as a freshman where he begins to do some things KJ was doing, i.e. hesitating, wanting to see guys come open before actually knowing they're going to be open and letting it go one time, trusting it, that kind of thing. The anticipation is there with him now, but as you start to lock up as a quarterback, you get confused, you're seeing too much, frankly. You hold the ball, you start to get, trigger shy because you don't want to throw a pick. If those things start to happen, they've got to be really careful with a true freshman. You don't want to have him have too many things burned into his memory that you're having to coach out of him in the future. But right now, I really liked what I saw. I know that it was one touchdown drive the other day, but when he came in the game, it was an immediate change from watching KJ play because Will was not hesitating. He was anticipating everything and just letting it go, making good decisions, make them on time, including some throwaways. He had one play there on the scoring drive, I think it was, Bo, where they're basically sacking him. And before he hits the turf, he just unloaded it at the feet of a guy, the running back, out to the sideline to just make sure you avoid the sack, take the incompletion, and go run third down. And that's valuing the ball if you just get rid of it at his feet. Unlike what KJ's doing, he just locked up. He's hesitating. The ball's not coming out on time. He's getting hit too much. when it does come out, he makes some decisions, underthrows where you're not valuing the ball in the pass game. He didn't value the ball when he's getting sacked several times, and they pick it up and run it in. So it changed because Will was just going in and playing and not hesitating and pulling the trigger. As long as he continues to do that, they'll roll with him, because that's going to eliminate getting hit as much,
right?
Especially against with an offensive line not playing well. But if he starts to hold it and lock up and get confused, you got to be really careful with that with a freshman and get him out of there.
Matt Wyatt on the Out of Bounds show. We've got a couple of minutes. Blake?
Yeah, Matt. Before the season, everybody said, Mississippi State has no wide receiver talent. Nobody experienced, nobody's there. This will never work. After the LSU game, it was like, look at all these guys. They're making all these plays, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's because it was man coverage. As soon as we see zone, one of the things that hasn't been talked about is the way receivers are running through zone holes and how they're not allowing their quarterbacks in some areas an ability to throw the ball in an open spot. Can you speak to that kind of for the rest of the season if that can change?
Yeah, they're learning too, Blake. They were having to read stuff also, like receivers reading coverage. And look, a lot of times, especially when you recruit guys out of high school, they haven't done that yet. And that's one thing that's so impressive to me about Wally is he's doing it. I don't know if that's a part of their system at D'Iberville or not. I haven't seen him play, but he's been really good as a freshman, kind of reading coverage. They have to read coverage also, man versus zone. And you're right, there are some times where they're sitting it down in a window, but if it's man, they take off running and run away from it. They have to read all that stuff too. And they do have talent. Their group was a little better, maybe from a talent perspective than some people thought, just because they hadn't had a chance to show any of it the last few years. Like Javonte Payton last year, his first year at State, what did they do? He averaged like one target a ball game. I mean, they hadn't been able to show anything. So they were a little better. But the problem is, like, you come out in week one and the results would tell you they're one of the best groups in the country. Well, no, they weren't. I mean, the truth is somewhere in the middle. That group maybe not as elite as they looked against LSU and not maybe as bad as they looked against maybe an Arkansas or somebody. It's somewhere in the middle. And you're right, Blake, it's strictly about if we've got 5 guys out in routes on just about every play, think about this, just from a numbers perspective. If we send 5 out in a route on just about every play, how often, how consistently are all 5 doing the right thing at the exact same time? Because that's what it takes.
0.
Okay? Right. Well, if we have one of the 5 that's out of position or 2 of the 5, and now we're fouled up, the same thing on the offensive line. Everybody goes, well, it's rushing 3 and can't block them with 5. Well, that's a one-on-one problem. So they've just got execution issues. People don't want to hear it, but that's just what it is.
Hey, I've got 40 seconds. Your thoughts on your time at MRA on Friday?
Unbelievable. That's a real deal football team, and I'm so impressed with their facilities, their people, their operation, Coach Herbert Davis. I was so impressed with MRA.
Matt, we appreciate your time today, bud. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Thank you, Bo.
Matt Wyatt, the Matt Wyatt Show, noon to 3 on 105.9 The Zone. Matt has dropped that video of spending several hours on the Madison Ridgeland Academy campus on Friday. And he went on and on about the MRA team and, again, the way they're coached and the way they approach the game. We're live in the Bank Plus studio. Brad Edwards, ESPN, 9:30. Welcome in. Good morning. Hang in there with us.